The UAW platform adopted at conventions in resolutions, many of them quite long, many of them expository before they came, therefore be it resolved, set forth not only an economic goal for the auto workers, but it had a vision. Walter always talked at conventions, always talked about many things, but he always talked about the children back home. And his 1946 article, which was a guiding light to him, and I think to the UAW, and I hope still is, we make progress with the community, not at the expense of the community. We are privileged, auto workers are privileged, but still are, because of the wealth of the industry and the strength of the union. So you had the parameters, the philosophy of the UAW was so that one could do almost anything. Now it's true, I had great freedom. I used to go into Walter once in a while when I was director of the Community Relations Department at that time. And I'd say, we'd like to do this or like to do that. And he would say, oh, that's okay. Millie, and I'd say, but I'd like to know what you think. He'd say, if you get into trouble, you will hear from me. So I had really, really great freedom.
You had great freedom, so you could march in Grosse Pointe or civil rights or anything like that.
Anybody could march in civil rights, but I got into a lot of causes which were maybe outside the union. But civil rights was a fundamental program of the UAW.
Now, was there much? Remember, there were a lot of Archie Bunker rank-and-file members. In fact, I interviewed Irv Bluestone. He made the point that Walter marched with Martin Luther King, and some of the members from the Deep South were probably less than enthusiastic. But did you run into any problems within the organization?
Walter was castigated in the South. There was a local union that the UAW appointed administrator in Memphis, International Harvester Local in Memphis, and an administrator was appointed because in the local union there were the toilets were black and white. An administrator was appointed to take over that local because of their segregation policies. Oh, it was very rough. The first time Walter went to the South was in Selma. And at that time, Selma was, in a sense, a barricaded, the black community was barricaded in a Jefferson housing, Thomas Jefferson housing project. Some of us, and because of this, Walter really had such vision. He never wanted to get too far ahead of where the membership was, where the rank and file was. Worked very hard at educating. However, on this issue, he felt, I think, that in early days it was better. The UAW was giving thousands of dollars to NAACP, which was criticized about. The literature was really vile about Walter. But some of us, Horace and others of us, Brendan Sexton, wanted Walter to go south. He needed, we felt, to feel it. And so he decided to go south for Selma. And Horace Sheffield and some others, and Horace and I were sort of his advance. And I remember we went down and we stayed in that, we stayed in this public housing project in Selma. The project literally was surrounded by state police cars, maybe they were state and local, I don't know, but it was bumper to bumper. And once you got in, you really couldn't get out. And
what was the purpose of the police surrounding it?
Well, this was all on voting rights.
Was it to protect you or not to protect you?
Oh, no, it was to contain, because Martin Luther King had, the idea was he wanted to march to the city hall to protest the right to vote. And they were not granted a permit. That was the particular issue at this time. So we were there, and I'll never forget, that was the night I listened on the floor, because there were a lot of people living in this little apartment in the public housing who would come to help march, or try to march. It was one of the great ideas of Andy Young, I think, and others who were in the Martin Luther King leadership. And it was the night Lyndon Johnson gave his "We Shall Overcome" speech. I was sitting on the floor.
Night that Lyndon Johnson did?
President Lyndon Johnson. Yeah. 3 times in that speech, he said, "And we shall overcome." Now that was the theme song of the Civil Rights Movement. Yeah. And here the President of the United States articulating those symbolic words was strengthening and sustaining. And the next day, Walter arrived, and there was this huge meeting in Brown Chapel. Remember, we were contained. And again, a request had been made to permit to march. And Walter was there, and we were there sitting in the church, waiting for Dr. King to come. And Andy Young came in, and he said, so I said, Walter's here. And so he went up to speak to Walter, and he said, "Oh, you must come and see Dr. King." So Andy, I went with him. Andy took Walter and went up to where Dr. King was waiting to, well, there'd been speech making going on in the church at Brown Chapel. So Walter and King met privately and talked, and then they came down together to the chapel. While we were there was this tenseness. Somehow or other, there was a rumor or something that a permit might be granted. But the hours went, and that's why we were waiting in the chapel. And hours went by, and because this had started, I think, about noon. Finally, we received the word at 4 o'clock we could march. Now, you understand, there had been bags. People were not let out into the street. It was incredible by this bully sheriff. So, but to march, it was 4 o'clock. You had to march 2 by 2 on the sidewalks, not on the street. And it was scary, because nobody knew what would happen. And somehow or other, it was 4 o'clock. It would be getting dark by the time we were going into evening, and we marched and to the city hall. And it was like Martin Luther putting on the church door the proclamation. Yeah. And I have a wonderful photo here, which appeared in Life magazine, at the door with Dr. King and Walter Reuther and the bishop of the Greek Orthodox Church and 2 nuns. They were at the front of the line. We were, of course, back here someplace. And that was the first time Walter marched with Martin Luther King. It was the first time he'd come to the South, and I think was a turning point, certainly a historic moment.
But Walter survived in the UAW. I understand. I mean, he did get good contracts and did get grievances processed.
Yes, so Walter Reuther never forgot that his primary responsibility was in the context of his philosophy, yeah, for the achieving a better society and a better living for the UAW members and all of society. But he knew in order to do that, the UAW had to be strong, and it had to be a reality